this Zoom call. I'm the National Director of CBMC Canada, and we're hosting this video call because we'd like to bring some value to our members and other people that are interested in CBMC and what we do. We have a special guest today, Carla Anne, who's an author and an international speaker. She's owned her own business and has experience in industries across the board from music to car sales. Carla Anne has her degree from Providence College and Seminary, and also her current education is with Rhodes Wellness College in BC. Carla Anne is a life and health and business coach and a member of the International Coaches Federation. I've invited Carla Anne to join us today to share about how she uses Enneagram in her coaching practice as a tool to help her clients succeed and as a resource to help people point to Jesus. And so, Carla Anne, thanks for being here.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
So that word Enneagram is a bit of a tongue twister for me, but I'll try and do it as best I can. So Carla, why don't you tell us, what is Enneagram?
Okay, so Enneagram is literally, Ennea means 9 and gram means shape. And so the Enneagram, if you ever have looked it up or you've seen it or you've heard about it, you've probably seen a picture similar to this, just a circle with 9 different points and then lines connecting all the numbers. And so all the different numbers, so the 9 numbers really represent 9 different types of personalities. And the lines show how they move from one kind of personality type to another. And so and that's what I really love about the Enneagram is like, there's many different kinds of personality assessments, and I've been trained in DISC and in strengths-based and the Lit Tower series. I don't know if you guys remember that from the 90s. And I'm also very familiar with the Myers-Briggs or the 16 personalities. What I really love about the Enneagram that's different than some of those is that it's motivation-based, but it's also not keeping you in a box. I think that's one of the things that I hear the most often from people is, I don't like to do personality assessments. I don't like to do all these things because I just feel like I'm being labeled and I'm being put in a box. And I agree because my personality is a little, I would say, strong. And so putting me in a box is not a good idea. I don't like to be put in a box. And so when I discovered the Enneagram, I'll just tell you, I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, and I have access to using the type 2 personality. I connect there, and I also connect to a 5. I also have wings on both sides of my main type, and this gives me options and choices. So when I'm working with people and coaching on the Enneagram, the thing that just really opens up is all the choices we have in how we behave based on our motivation. And so that's pretty much what the Enneagram is. And so when I look at like these 9 types, okay, so like the 9 different types, they all have different kinds of motivations. And that's the other thing that's different between the Enneagram and say DISC or Myers-Briggs is that it's not behavior-based, because we've all worked with people. You've been in the work environment and you say one thing to one person, and then all of a sudden you say the same thing to someone else, and that line doesn't work. And you're like, why can't I motivate this person to do the job? And for example, let's just pick something. So let's say you have a staff person or a team member who just is not getting their work done. They're either procrastinating or they're not getting their work done. That's their behavior. So you could stereotype their behavior, or you could look at their motivation. So, but around the Enneagram, if you have someone who's a type 1, the reason they might not be getting their work done is because their motivation is to make sure that they're good and that they're doing it right and that they have integrity. So if I say to a type 1, like, why aren't you getting the work done? First of all, they're going to feel like they failed because they're not doing a good job, but they're also going to be conflicted because they might feel pressured to be doing the work, but they don't have the ability to do it good enough. So that motivation is about being good enough. Whereas a type 2, they're not as concerned about whether or not they're good enough. Their concern is, will I be loved or will I be needed here as I'm doing this job? So their motivation is very much more relational. What does this mean between you and me if I do or don't get this job done? A type 3 is very success oriented and achievement oriented. They would be the least likely to not get their work done. But if they're not, their motivation is because they sense that a fear that failure is likely. So they're not gonna even engage because they're afraid of failure. A type 4, on the other hand, might not be getting their work done because they really are concerned with being unique and authentic. And so if they're just doing what everyone else does, they don't feel like they're achieving who they are as a person. Their motivation really is to be unique, special, and valuable for being authentic. A type 5 is your researcher. This is your analytical person, the person whose main concern is, do I have all the information and am I truly competent? So the reason they might not be getting their work done is because they haven't done enough research yet and they don't feel competent with the information to complete the task. A type 6 is someone who's really concerned about safety, security, and collaboration. So if a type 6 is left all by themselves, they're going to feel alone and unsupported, and they're not going to be able to get the job done. They're also going to be afraid that they're going to make mistakes. So this is going to hold them back. Type 7 is going to be like, okay, well, I'll do it, but I have to do all these other things first, and I don't want to miss out on these things. So I'm going to just put that off for now, but the future may never come for a type 7. Type 8, that's someone like me. I might not be getting this done because if I've been told what to do and I've been told how to do it, and I've been told you're going to do it this way, this time, I'm going to be like, you can't control me. You can't tell me what to do. And so I'm going to pull back and go, okay, I'm going to do it my way, so you're not controlling me. A type 9, they might not be doing it because they are actually afraid of conflict, and engaging in this project might make them feel like there's a lot of stress. And so they're trying to avoid all of that. And they're just trying to keep sort of some inner stability. So the simple question of, when you look at a staff person or someone on your team going, why is the work not getting done? There's 9 very different reasons on why your staff people, your personnel might not be getting the work done. So understanding the Enneagram and what motivates them allows all of us to be able to understand, how can we actually meet their need, their core need of motivation, to actually help them be successful in the workplace. So that's a little bit about the Enneagram and how I would use that, particularly in the workplace, or even in families, like even in relationships. There's sometimes the same action has very different motivations. So that's what I really like about the Enneagram. It gives us a wide variety, so we're not plugging people into one thing or the other. And it changes how we communicate. So for example, let's take that same thing, like not getting their work done. So now let's say the supervisor comes along and says to someone like, who might be a type 6, who's really concerned about collaboration and safety and security. And they say, you know what, if you don't get this done, your job is in jeopardy. Oh my goodness, you've just created an unsafe environment, which is going to make this person even more scared to get the job done and get it done wrong. And so they're likely going to retreat even further. They may even quit before the deadline because this is very scary for them. Whereas you tell a type 3, you don't get this job done, your job is on the line, they're going to be like, oh, I need to get this done because I don't want to fail. And they're like super, achievement and success driven. So they're going to make sure they get that done. 2 very, very different responses to the same kind of like directive, I guess. And you tell someone like type 8, okay, I want you to work on this project. I'm going to come check on you every 10 minutes until this project is done. A type 8 is going to go, no way, you are not going to micromanage me. forget that, I'm out of here. That would be kind of the type 8. Whereas your type 6, who really likes collaboration and likes that support, is going to thrive under that kind of, they won't even think of it as micromanaging. They will think of this as support. They'll think of it as accountability. It's a completely different kind of thing. So when you understand people and their motivations, you can actually engage with them, motivate them, and recruit their support differently when you understand. That's what I love about the Enneagram. Oh, Randy, I think you're talking, but I can't hear you. Am I the only one who can't hear Randy?
There we go. A little technical glitch here. Okay, thank you very much, Carla Anne. So with all that information, why is Enneagram useful for business people? Or how is it useful for business people?
It's very useful because as leaders, especially as Christian leaders in the business world, we know that much of what we're doing is leading people not just to have a successful bottom line, but we want to minister to them as people, and we want to be able to meet their needs, give them an environment that is safe, an environment that they feel like they can thrive. And there's often in different workplaces, there's high turnover, and that's not good for business, but neither is it good for our reputation as entrepreneurs, as business leaders, when either we are burning out our staff or the environment and the sort of ambiance around, or the culture in our workplaces is also toxic to the people who are there. So if we can provide a way for them to understand themselves, a way for them to understand each other, and for our leaders to understand the people that they are leading, it gives a safer place for people to work, lower the turnover, engage people so that they can be successful in the way that sort of feels natural to themselves. I was working with one company locally here who came to me and said, we have such a high turnover, like we cannot keep this one position filled. This position, we just keep hiring and they quit. We hire, they quit, hire, they quit. We find they're doing a great job and they just keep quitting. And what they were doing was they would throw money at this position. So this position kept getting like a higher and higher and higher salary. And finally, by the time they came to me, they had someone in what I would consider an entry-level manager position at a very high salary level. But they were like, why can't we keep this position filled? And then they had offered even more. I think it was like more than like an additional $10,000. Just please stay with us. When their last one came to them and said they were quitting, giving their 2 weeks notice, and nope, not staying. That manager moved to a much lower, actually just over minimum wage position instead of making a really good salary. But we were looking at what was the motivation here. Well, clearly earning money and being successful was not their motivation. Their motivation actually came from feeling safe. And when it came to feel safe, it was the way the relationships in the team were working. It was the rules. It was the unscheduled or unsettled schedule that kept happening. And they did not feel safe. They would rather take a $40,000 reduction in yearly wage to go to a place where they feel safe, there's routine, they're encouraged, they get affirmation, and that feeling of safety can sort of settle and be there. And that makes a big difference. When you're an employer, you might actually not have to pay as much as you think you're paying. I still think you need to pay your people what they're worth, but there might be other motivations that will engage their loyalty and give them a better ability to work to their full potential if we're dealing with their core motivations and desires and longings. So that's really what I think is core, is building those relationships, helping communication and conflict resolution, because different people around the Enneagram are going to handle conflict different. So for example, I'm an 8. If you have an issue with me, I invite you, just come, bring it on. We might need to box it out, and I'm okay with that. But there are some people that if they have a conflict, it needs to be done very gently, very, very gently, and always with the reassurance that, you know, relationship is still intact. You still matter to me. This is important. Let's work this out in a really safe, careful, we'll follow the rules. We'll make sure we're doing everything right and with integrity. That will make that person feel like, oh, I can engage in this conflict because I'll be okay here. Whereas there's some others who are like, you can just literally send them an email and say, fix this. And they're going to be like, okay, got it. No conflict there. Whereas someone else, you say, fix it. And they're going to go, oh, I did such a bad job. And they'll beat themselves up and be less ready to attack the next project they're given because they're still beating themselves up from the last time we told them to fix something. So we need to, as leaders, really know who our people are. And you've heard, you know, people like John Maxwell say we need to be servants, and that's how we're the best leaders. And Jesus said that first. And I think when we are serving our people and we are understanding who they are and genuinely loving the people we serve, we will put the effort into getting to know who they are and then meeting them where they're at. And as Christian leaders, that's what Jesus did for us, isn't it? So that's why I think business people need this.
Okay, very good, Carla Anne. So tell me, with all the personality tools and assessments and evaluations available, and there's a lot of them out there, and you've alluded to many of them, why would a Christian business person want to use Enneagram with their staff versus all those other ones?
That is a super good question. And I am very passionate about this because you're right. There's Myers-Briggs, there's the DISC, there's strengths-based, and I'm trained in many of them. And I could use them with any business, with different businesses, and I have. But there's something unique with the Enneagram for Christians that the others don't have. And that is something called the core weakness. So every single type on the Enneagram also has what's called a core weakness. Now that's the language that the Enneagram uses, core weakness. And welcome to 2021. We are in a world where the world does not understand or agree on absolute truth. They don't even agree that sin exists. We're in a society where everyone kind of does their own thing, follow your heart, your truth is your truth, and someone else's truth is their truth, and we don't have to agree, you just live by your heart. Well, the Enneagram gives us language as Christian leaders to actually engage in that core weakness. Recently, I was in a course, and of all of the people in the course, I was the only believer. But what I found fascinating was that all of these people who are secular knew their Enneagram type. They were very aware of their Enneagram type, and they were aware of their core weakness. Now, if I had asked any of them, so what's an area that you might sin in? They'd be like, oh, no, you can't judge me. I don't sin. I don't believe in sin. Blah, blah, blah. And they push you away because you're that Christian that has that black and white issue of sin, and they don't have absolute truth. So if there's no absolute truth, is there actually sin? Yeah, that's the society that we're living in right now. But every single one of them knows their core weakness. So that engages a whole new level of conversation. So the different weaknesses are, for example, the type 9, I'll go backwards around the Enneagram. The type 9, their core weakness is sloth. And that's really about not engaging in the purposes that God has created you for. And the 8 is the weakness of an 8, that's me, is lust or intensity. It's not sexual lust necessarily, but it's that passion and intensity that will overdo it in everything. They'll overdo it in the way they love people. They'll overdo it in the way they buy. They'll overdo it in the way they eat. They'll overdo it in lots of things. Overdo it in exercise. So that's that intensity for the 8. For a 7, theirs is way more attached to, am I going to miss out? So their core fear is going to be different, their core weakness. With a 6, their core weakness is anxiety and fear. And for each of these, and as I go through them, you're going to know Jesus is actually the answer to all of these, right? So a core A 5, a core fear for, or the core weakness for a 5 is avarice, otherwise known as greed or hoarding of internal resources. And for a 4, their fear and their core weakness is, right now I just pulled a blank, I can't remember. But for the 3, it's deceit. They live in a state of deceit, never letting people know who they are. They put on a mask. And they know that, and they can feel it. And they know that they're not being genuine, authentic. And they often feel, and you'll hear them say, I'm living a lie. The number 2, the type 2 on the Enneagram, theirs is very different again. And theirs is looking at overstepping their boundaries in being needy and needing others. And so there's like a boundary stepping over there. And then to number 1, their core fear is resentment. And the other one is pride. That's what number 4 is, pride. But their number 1 is like, their core thing is like resentment, because they feel like they are never going to be good enough. So they resent themselves and everyone else around them. All of these different core weaknesses, Jesus is the answer. So the other thing that's different about how a Christian coach would handle these things is to say, we're not going to use this to find out who is our true self. We're going to use this to discover who we are. But then as Christian leaders, we can say, okay, here's the core weakness that your Enneagram type has. And this is how Jesus is the answer. For a type 1 who feels like I'll never be good enough, let me tell you what Jesus did for you on the cross. Let me tell you, because that is amazing. He made you good when he covered you with his blood. So now we can be like him, right? Someone like me, I'm a type 8. How does my weakness, which is lust and intensity, how does Jesus meet that? He says to me, come and let me give you rest. You can lay that down. You don't actually have to be passionate and intense right now. You can rest. And it's like, wow, okay. So as we're learning about the Enneagram, as Christian leaders, if you have the language and the tools around this, and as your people get to know it, you also have the opportunity to share your testimony. What has God done with you to help you reach that kind of potential, or deal with some of those really difficult things about your personality? But it also instructs them to say, you know what, Jesus might be an option to help you with this. Would it be okay if I share my testimony? Would it be okay if we Googled some Bible verses about this? And it opens up opportunity, because they are finally at a place where they have a weakness they can share without us talking about that, taboo word called sin. So that's why I think the Enneagram right now in this post-Christian era is perfect for such a time as this. Yeah.
Very good answer. I'm going to just add one more question here. And I know you have clients that you work with, and how much, so let's say you have a client and that person employs a bit of a challenge, just put it that way. How much time or how many sessions would it take to, and I know you can't change people by yourself, but just to take them from maybe a situation where it's not very good to a situation where it's pretty good? That's fair enough?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So typically, there's not going to be any typical answer, because every person is going to come with different reasons on why they are going to be coached, or if they're being sent, it's going to be different than if they, signed up for themselves because they realize a need. So, and that's going to be very different from person to person. However, I normally say we need about 6 weeks to establish what is your Enneagram type. The reason is because it's not behavior-based, you can do assessments online. Chances are they're not going to be accurate, because all of the assessments are going to essentially ask for or behavior questions. That's really all we can ask for. So what happens as we go through the first 6 weeks, typically of coaching, if I'm doing one-on-one coaching, that is, then we're looking at what is your type, how are you reacting? And as we go through that process of deciding, what motivations do you have? What are your fears? What are your desires? What are your conflict styles? What centers of intelligence do you use? And that's just another piece, even for working with conflict and communication. Figuring out how do people engage with conflict? Is it their gut, their head, their heart? So that can take at least 6 weeks. And then once we have that sort of established, the next 6 weeks, we really focus on, okay, now that we know. So for example, for myself, I'm an 8. I rely heavily on my 7. I don't know if you can see that. But I also, in my centers of intelligence, I move between 3, 6, 8, and 5 back and forth. And I use my 2 a lot when I'm doing really well in capacity. So now the goal is to educate and encourage and motivate each person to use the Enneagram numbers that are the most appropriate for the situation. So this is giving them language, this is giving them words and resourcing them with tools to be able to live out how God created them in a way that brings life and health to themselves and the world around me. So it can take 12 weeks, it can take longer, but by the time you're at 6 weeks, you're seeing change. By the time you're at 12 weeks, you're usually seeing quite a bit more change. Normally at that point, there's significant enough change that they're looking at, okay, maybe I need to learn more. And then depending on, of course, what the situations are, they may continue and even move into using Enneagram for their marriage, using Enneagram for their friend circles, using Enneagram for their departments. So it really depends on different people, but yeah, somewhere between 6 and 12 weeks you'll see change.
Okay, so you're telling me you can change me in 12 weeks?
I can't change you. You can change you if you allow me to help you figure out the Enneagram. Yeah. And you know, we know that Jesus is the one who does the changing, right? And we just use the way he's created us to say, okay, now how do we do this together with God's help?
Fair enough. Very good. Thanks, Carla Anne. Thank you very much for that, those answers to those questions. And okay, so that brings us to the end of the recording. So what we'll do now is we'll open up for comments, questions from anyone.